Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I think we'll make a start. Thank you all very much for coming this evening to the first in-person meeting of any of the Kensington and Chelsea planning committees since our lives were all rather interrupted in March last year by COVID. So it's very good to be back. We're doing it in the council chamber this evening to maintain social distancing, so it's slightly different for all of us. My name is Charles O'Connor. I am one of the vice chairman of the committee, and I'm chairing this evening's proceedings. Down to my right are my fellow councillor colleagues who, together with me, will be taking the decisions this evening. I won't ask them all to stand up and introduce themselves individually, but you'll hear from them during the course of proceedings. On my immediate left here are officers from the Council's Planning Department, headed by Lisa Chung, who's the senior officer here this evening, and we have Katie Hurrell and Derek Taylor, who will be presenting the cases this evening. On my right are officers from the governance and legal teams, and below me here as well. And thank you all very much for all of you who've come to assist this evening. I've been asked to remind you to please keep your microphones off unless you're speaking, and please to keep your masks on unless you're speaking, but please do take your masks off to speak so that it's clearer for everyone. The meeting is being live streamed, so please do turn on your microphones so that we can hear you and so that the recording can pick up your voice. I'll explain the procedure as we go along for those of you who are not familiar with how we operate, but it should be reasonably clear and straightforward. So we now move to the agenda items, and the first of those is to note the membership of the planning committees that was recently agreed in the Council's annual meeting. So I think all we have to do is note that membership. We then move on to apologies for absence. I believe there are none. Certainly the councillors are all present. The next is declarations of interest. Colleagues, if you've got any pecuniary declarations, first of all, please, could you let me know? None. And if you have any other declarations, could you please let me know? Councillor Evans, thank you.
Yes, I'll be recusing myself from 7 Hereford Square because we have been working with the residents on this one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think Councillor Spalding, you also have a declaration.
Thank you, Chairman. I do know the objectors, Claudia Bronda and Carol Harris, but I have not discussed the first item with them. And so I will stay on the committee because I have no predetermination of this at all. For item number 2, I do know Sophia Lambert, but again, I have not discussed this and I have no predetermination. For number 3, all councillors, of course, know Councillor Kamali, who is an objector, but I haven't discussed this case with him. And for item number 6, Erdley Crescent, it's literally the next street to where I live. And I do know the lady who either did live or does live in that flat. And so, with your permission, Chairman, I'd like to recuse myself completely from that item.
Thank you very much. That's noted. So we now move on to the approval of minutes of previous meetings. There are 2, and the first of those was held on the 13th of April, and I have already approved these minutes. May I please sign these as a true and accurate record? Thank you. And the second from the 27th of April, when I was also on the committee but not chairing it. If I may sign those, thank you. And we now move on to this evening's proceedings, and the running order that we are taking is, first of all, number 7 Hereford Square, then Elgin Crescent, then the advertisement in Sloane Square, then Portobello Road, Uxbridge Street, Erdley Crescent, Brompton Road, Cottesmore Gardens, the Peter Jones Shrouding, Calcott Street, Stafford Terrace, twice, and Notting Hill Gate. So I think the first of those, Hereford Square, is that you, Katie Alp?
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. I will hopefully move the slides along. There we go, thank you. So the application site is a 5-storey property located on the southern side of Hereford Square. I started my presentation with some aerial images of the property for you there, as the context of the site, and particularly the built form of the neighbouring properties, is important in forming your decision on the proposals before you. You'll note that both properties on either side, at numbers 6 and 8, feature large 2-storey rear extensions which extend right to the rear boundary and incorporate roof terraces. This slide provides some photographs of the application site, with the image on the left-hand side showing the boundary with number 8, where my cursor is there, and you can see the railings to the terrace above. And the image on the right-hand side shows the existing 2-storey glazed infill extension at the application site. On this slide, you can see, sorry, the top image is slightly blurry, but you can see the boundary with number 6 in the top photo, and then the bottom photo shows you the view looking rearwards from the first floor window of the application property. And on this slide, it's just the last couple of photographs for you, again looking rearwards, with the extension and roof terrace at number 6 visible on the left hand of the two images there, and the existing garden area of number 7 in the right-hand image. You can see where my cursor is, this is the existing boundary, and this is their amenity space there. Also, just here, note the distance between the rear boundary and the properties behind on Breacham Place. So on to the proposals. Planning permission is sought for the demolition of that 2-storey glazed infill and the erection of a lower ground floor and ground floor extension with a roof terrace. I'll run you through the architectural drawings in a moment, but to start, I've just included this model that has been provided by the applicant, as I think it's quite handy in just illustrating the proposals. So there's the existing model on the screen now, and then the proposed for you there, with the new extension shaded in that pink. Just quickly in plan, with the existing on the slide now, and then the proposed drawings for you on the screen, starting with the lower ground floor on the far left, the ground floor in the middle, and then the first floor on the right. You'll have seen from the report at paragraph 4.4 that planning permission was granted by the Planning Applications Committee back in 2017 for the same proposals as before you this evening. There is one difference to the scheme. Whereas previously in the existing light well at lower ground floor area, hopefully you can see my cursor, there was just to be a simple balustrade to that light well. Under the new proposals, this would now be covered with a glazed roof structure. It's probably best illustrated in section, so here's the existing section for you, and then the proposed, so there you can see that glazed structure within that light well. You can also see the doors to the side elevation of that new extension, which would open out onto the remaining area of the garden space at the application site. So my very last slide for you is a mock-up of what the extension would look like. So you can see with the railings to the terrace above, and then those doors that I just mentioned out into that amenity area. And lastly, please just note condition 6, which asks for details of these railings and the proposed screening to that terrace area to ensure they're both appropriate in design terms, but also in their function to ensure the privacy of the occupiers at number 6 and number 8 on either side and the properties at the rear. And that concludes the presentation.
Thank you very much indeed for that. We now move to hear from the objectors to this application, and we have two objectors registered to speak, Mrs. Bronder and Mrs. Harris. And if you have been to one of our committees before, you'll know that you have 3 minutes between you to explain why you're opposed to this application, and I will let you know when those 3 minutes are up. But it's up to you to decide between you how you want to share those 3 minutes. When you're ready, please. No, we can't. You need to press. There we are.
Good evening, Chairman and Councillors, and thank you for letting me speak here tonight. My name is Claudia Bronder and I live at Flat 2, 14 Brecon Place, SW7, my ground floor flat and garden back onto 7 Hereford Square. Unlike Hereford Square, the houses in Brecon Place are subdivided into flats, with their bedrooms on the quieter garden side. If you were to grant permission to this application, the effect on the neighbours will be devastating. To state these, they are: first, a loss of privacy, as all our back rooms will need to keep the curtains drawn at all times. Party noises or even loud conversations will disturb our night rest. Noise and chatter will be like a canyon of sound for us all from the encroaching walls. Light pollution from the use of their terrace illumination at night. The closeness to our windows will give us a sense of oppressive enclosure. Finally, there will be a large loss of the sky we currently enjoy and daylight from the closeness of the build to our properties. For all the above reasons, I urge you to refuse this application.
My name is Carol Harris, and I'm chair of the South Kensington and Queensgate Residents Association, and I'm speaking on behalf of the 16 families in the 3 houses that back onto Brecon Place that will be severely affected by this proposal. In your summary report 1.1, the suggestion is made that the proposed development would preserve the character of the host property, the neighbouring and wider Queensgate conservation area, as well as safeguarding the living conditions of the neighbouring occupiers. My final 2 minutes will concentrate on these 2 elements: the conservation of this historic building and the safeguarding and living conditions of the neighbours. Number 7, built in 1865, a single-owned property, and sits between 2 identical, very large individual-owned properties on the delightful Hereford Square. This proposed development to this historic building, however, is all at the back. And as we all know from the recent South Kensington station, the back is of equal importance. Not gone unnoticed by Brecon Place owners, whose windows are less than 20 feet from the boundary, has been the rush at number 7 to fell the mature trees, dig out the flower beds, and concrete the whole small garden in readiness for the build. The proposed large, uplifted, secluded terrace and additional rooms for the owners will be a delight, but it will be a menace to all the rear properties, especially as it will at the bedroom level. The light spill, the noise generated throughout the day, and especially at night, will be an unstoppable intrusion to them all. On a hot summer evening like tonight, putting a small child to bed, and there are 7 in these flats that back on, they will not get to sleep. Do you close the window, or do you do as I have done, take a hurried walk around to number 7 and ask them to keep the noise down? Most likely, as the others on the square already offer Airbnb, it really becomes impossible with uncaring guests. To summarise, the rear of this beautiful historic property will be damaged and lost forever, and there are no conditions for noise and nuisance that can be applied to their terrace. I sincerely hope that the councillors and planners will dismiss this unwanted and unnecessary proposal and comply with their own summary in 1.1. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed. Just slightly over your time there, but thank you.
I'm very grateful.
No, not at all. That was very helpful, thank you. And now we have the opportunity for the councillors to put questions to the objectors. And first of all, Councillor Woodger's hand I saw first.
Good evening. My question for the objectors is, how much consultation did you get from the applicant?
None. I mean, we just got the standard letter that came. But by consultation, what do you mean? I mean,
Did they engage with you? Did they
No,
talk to you about what
no.
was being proposed? No, no.
And I can confirm they didn't consult with the association either.
Okay.
And Councillor Dencode.
Thank you. I was trying to work out the length from the windows. Perhaps Ms. Bronder will let me know, because I think I had somebody say 20 foot, but it looks much closer than that from where this balcony would be. And also, what are there either side of them? Is there anything else like that in this terrace that would give a kind of precedent that we're fighting against, or not?
it's less than the amount you said. In terms of what you have on either side, they're all back gardens, so that they're all well planted with mature trees. I'm talking about the Brecon Place side of it, and we see it as a green oasis, and so then it is quite special for that reason, because one wouldn't necessarily think that you'd have a little green garden at the back of these high-sided buildings.
I have a question for Mrs. Bronder as well, please. That is, I think you said that you would feel a sense of loss of privacy, and I just wondered, why is that different for what is proposed here than from the buildings either side of it? Because you can see that there are large extensions coming out either side. Is it that your particular property just happens to sit directly opposite the proposed development?
I'd say the difference is that it's the intention that this is going to be built to be a fully functional first floor roof terrace, whereas at number 6, it's only half, it isn't built all the way. They have retained half of their rear garden, and so they've only got like a half-size first-floor roof terrace, and that doesn't have intensive use. It's just very occasional use. So that's one difference. And this one is just they're using all the available space, so there won't be any available. It's for that reason. It seems like it will be a purpose-built, fully functional first floor. It's a bit like adding a second floor. It will, in effect, be a second floor, and it will be, I could see it being put to great use as an outdoor living room.
That's very helpful, thank you. So you're saying that the neighbouring property to the development property, the roof terrace only comes out halfway along the extension?
Yes,
right, so I hadn't fully appreciated that.
At number 8 and number 6. That's not really been put to much use, because I think they're still doing some window work.
I see. Okay, we might take that up with the officers in a second. Thank you very much. Colleagues, any further questions for the objectors? No? All right. Well, thank you both very much. We'll now move to invite the councillor colleagues of mine to ask any questions they have of Katie Harrell. Councillor Spalding.
Thank you, Chairman. Looking at the drawings in the plans, I found these particularly unhelpful. They were not easy to read, but can I refer to the ones which are basically last but 1 and last but 2 in the pack? That's those two. There's a cross-section showing the roof terrace with trees planted on the top. Is on the right-hand side, is that elevation, that facade, is that the buildings in Brecon Place that the objectors refer to? And if so, what's the distance between the edge of the roof terrace and Brecon Place? That distance is not marked on any of the plans or elevations.
Yes, you're correct. So I'm sorry, you're absolutely right. The drawings are really faint in the pack, so I apologise that they're not the clearest, but you can see, hopefully you can see the rear boundary to the application property, and then you're right, on the far right-hand side of that image are the properties, and you can see the window, in fact, right at the bottom of that, I believe, is the objector's lower ground floor window. In terms of the distance, I'm afraid I won't be able to give you an exact measurement. You're right, they're not drawn on the plan, but it is close. It's about 5 metres, I believe.
Can you give me an estimate for the direction, the distance in metres?
I think it's about 5 metres.
About 5
from the
metres.
officer's assessment.
Or 16 feet? Why I'm making an issue of this is because I believe we have a sort of rule of thumb of 18 feet.
That is often a starting point, absolutely, and then you need to take into account the existing context and the relationship between the other properties. But yes, when you're looking at something like a new build, for example, that is sort of like the gold standard, I suppose, in terms of the sort of distances you would expect to see between windows to ensure privacy.
Between windows?
That's
Okay, and then the last question is the next plan drawing of the roof, which is the very next page. And that shows what is called a blue roof area. It seems to me that we've lost a lot of open garden space and not replaced it with anything that's green. And I do believe we resist the loss of green backland space. It seems that most of the garden, if not all of it, will be built over and developed, and there will be no green space left.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. They are building over a lot of the garden. The image I've got on screen here, I hope, is of some use. So the bottom photograph, this was taken back in 2018 when the officer went previously to the site. And you can see that actually the garden to the application property has been completely boarded over and decked over, and has been for a number of years. Again, in this right-hand photograph, you can see that area there. So this is the application garden. So yes, it serves, it's an open space and that contributes to the character, but in terms of green space, its contribution is fairly limited. In terms of the area that would be built over, it is a lot of that space. This is probably best illustrated on this plan on the screen now. This middle drawing, this is the ground floor plan. You can see where my cursor is there. This area is the extension area, and then the sort of mottled area on the left-hand side, that's the remaining open space of the garden. So approximately 2/3 of that space would be taken up by the new extension.
Just one quick last one then, Chairman, if I may. If it's not actual loss of green space, it was potentially green, did it supply drainage? Because this roof is not permeable, obviously. Are we creating development which is going to add to flooding or water runoff problems?
I'm afraid I don't know whether it previously was completely permeable. Perhaps it might have been grass many years ago. Certainly we know that for several years it has been decked over. In terms of flooding implications, I believe we do have a recommended condition to ask for further details to ensure that there is no adverse impact on drainage. So we've got condition number 8 recommended, which looks at ensuring sustainable drainage system is introduced and that an appropriate flood risk strategy is provided.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dentcote.
Mystified as to why we're agreeing for this extension to be built right up to the boundary. I thought we would, especially in a very tight space that we would resist that altogether. So it looks as if it's going to be right up to the back of the boundary wall, even if it's not its full width. And we've been hearing it would be like an outside room. So if that was an actual enclosed room, we wouldn't allow that presumably, but what we're allowing is something which will be used just the same, it's just that it wouldn't have a roof and walls. So surely the whole issue of not allowing people to build up so they can peer over into gardens and all the rest of it, it prevails whether or not there's a roof and walls, because it will be used exactly the same. So I'm just very confused as to why this is even allowed within our rules. I wonder if somebody can explain that to me, please.
Thank you very much. Absolutely, normally a proposal of this scale where an extension would extend out to this extent and to the rear boundary of the property might not be acceptable. We would often look at this and think it's particularly large. However, we've given a lot of weight here to the existing context, the fact that both the neighbouring properties, as you can see on the screen, have extensions of a comparable depth right to their rear boundaries, and indeed both of them have roof terraces on that roof. So I totally sympathise that this might be something that usually we would look at and perhaps be quite cautious to recommend for approval. But in this instance, we have to give an awful lot of weight to the neighbouring situation. In terms of the use of the terrace, again, we've given weight to the fact that there are terraces on either side, plus that outdoor space is already being used, albeit at a lower level. And we have, as I said, recommended that condition just to ensure that the privacy screens at least give the visual privacy to the residents of the properties at the rear. And then in terms of noise and disturbance from the use of that terrace, I suppose officers' conclusion is that it would be comparable to use of the garden space or the levels of noise already experienced through the use of the two terraces on either side.
Can I just follow up, please? Sorry.
Yeah.
What we've been hearing, if I understood correctly, is that the terraces either side, even as they may be built, the extensions may be built further out, is that the terraces don't extend to the full width. So we don't know, but assuming that they did that in the pursuit of neighbourliness, and I think it makes quite a big difference actually if it's at ground level or higher up, just because of how noise reverberates. If it's higher up, it's a completely different issue. So I'm just really mystified as to why something which is so extensive and very obviously will allow people a direct view into people's bedrooms would even be considered permissible. I don't understand where we are with this. And, we're always told that each application is considered on its own merits, but it's just a descending spiral, really. If the others have extensions, but they don't have balconies, terraces right up to the end, and then this one will do, and heaven knows what will be next. I don't know. I'm mystified as to why we could think about supporting this.
Perhaps it might be helpful just for me to clarify the situation about the terraces on either side. So the photograph on the left-hand side is looking at the extension and the terrace on that side. So you can see it does extend all the way out to the rear. And then on the right-hand side, this is the other neighbouring property. I'm afraid I haven't got a better picture of that, but you can see the railings there to that terrace also extend out across the full depth of the extension, albeit the extension doesn't fill the full garden area of that property. How those terrace spaces are being used, it may well be, as we've heard from the objector, that they're used only occasionally and that the residents aren't going out right to the rear and standing at the very end. But certainly in terms of accessible space and the boundary treatment, sort of the fencing or balustrading on both those flat roofs on the extensions on either side does go right to the rear of the boundary.
Thank you very much, Katie Hull. I just want to clarify one point, because it seems here that someone's wrong. It's suggested that the terraces on either side don't go the full way, but you say they do. And then we're being asked to use the buildings on either side as justification for what we're proposing, or what's before us this evening. So I think we need to understand whether what's actually proposed here is something greater than what is either side. You're completely clear, are you, that both developments on either side, both extensions on either side, go no further than what is proposed here, and nor do their roof terraces. The roof terraces on either side go out as far as what is proposed here.
That was certainly the case back in 2017 when the officer made their original site visit for that application, and these photographs show that situation. So I'm as confident as I can be on the basis of the evidence I have and from what's in the officer's recommendation. Having not visited the site myself, I'm afraid I can't give you more reassurances than that. I would say that decision from 2017 took into account the impact of that terrace and privacy and was found to be acceptable. And again, in coming to that conclusion, weight was given to the existing situation on either side.
Could we just see the aerial view as well, please? I don't know if that especially helps. Where are the terraces on either side there?
So where my cursor is here, this is the terrace to number 6.
That's a round table, isn't it?
Yeah, so that's the table and chairs to it there. And then this is at number 8. So you can see, although it doesn't go right to the edge of the boundary with the application site, it does go right to the rear, although unfortunately you're not able to see in this aerial photograph the balustrade that would be around that. But in the far side of this image, you can see that railing there. So sorry it's not clearer. I wish I had a better photograph to illustrate that to you.
So
I
just
don't think either of those are helpful either, sorry.
Going back to the aerial photograph, if you would, please. So at the south end, as it were, of that, of the terrace to the left, there, someone could stand there.
Yes,
is your understanding?
So that, from my understanding, that black metal railing that we just saw in those photos runs all the way along here to this end point here.
And similarly, just to the right of that yellow arrow.
And then where my cursor is now, that was the wooden fence boundary treatment in the other photograph.
And they're at the same height as what is proposed now?
That's correct. So there we go. You can see there, that's the wooden boundary, wooden fence, sorry, to this terrace. And then on the other side, to number 8, there's that railing that I referred to. But I'm sorry, I don't have a better picture looking across onto the roof of number 8.
Okay, no, that's very helpful, thank you. And could you just also please talk about the weight that needs to be given to the lapsed permission?
Yes, so it is now lapsed. It wasn't implemented within time, but I think it's important to note that although we have adopted our local plan in 2019, and so we do have new policies, the content of the policies of relevance here, which are the design and living conditions policies, remain as they were worded back in 2017, and certainly the considerations in my mind remain the same as under that previous application back in 2017.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you, because I think as a committee we need to do our best ordinarily to try and be consistent with what previous committees have decided. It's not helpful when the committee takes a different view each time a similar application comes before it. So that's interesting that the previous application in 2017 was essentially for the same thing, and the policies haven't changed markedly. Colleagues, any further questions for officers before we discuss it amongst ourselves? No. All right. Well, do any of you colleagues have a view that you'd like to put forward on this? Councillor Woodruff.
It's a tricky one, really, because of the previous lapse permission, obviously the difference is this glazed roof structure. My reluctance is, if we were to approve this, so if we were to decline this, it could still get through on appeal. So my feeling is, because of the neighbouring properties, if you look at 9, 8 and 6, I would reluctantly allow it. It's only because of that context. Otherwise, I would have said no, but I think we have to be consistent with the previous decision and the context of the area.
Yeah, I think that's a fairly powerful view. Any other views from colleagues? Councillor Spalding.
Thank you, Chairman. Looking at the officer's report 6.3, this is a conservation area. There is great amenity value of the little bit of greenness that remains. In view of all those windows, and the officer concludes there are similar rear extensions, but to me they are harming the amenity of that space, that open space, and potentially green space. And just because harm has been done to a conservation area doesn't mean to say we should condone further harm. And the officer says it would not constitute overdevelopment. Well, given the footprint, which is completely filled, it would be difficult to see what would be overdevelopment if that isn't. There's a huge loss of open space and sense of openness. It's all becoming a monolithic, complete infill. And also, I'm worried about this less than 18 foot. Because what we're very often told, oh yes, things can go ahead because they're greater than 18 feet away. And this isn't. So the converse ought to apply. And the previous permission, which lapsed, it does say lower ground and ground floor with a roof terrace and privacy screens. And I'm not sure that we have seen any privacy screens. We've seen some trees, and we've seen a blue roof. So I don't think it's up to the permission that was granted before. I haven't seen the previous one. So although that's been given significant weight, I think this one is probably doing more harm than good.
If I may just play devil's advocate there, the loss of green space that you referred to, I don't quite understand that, because as far as I can see from the photographs anyway, that all that greenery is in the back gardens of Brecon Place, not the proposed development property, and what is proposed here is really to develop on top of decking. So that's just an opposing view. And also you say that the footprint will be completely developed over, as it were. I had understood that it's not going to be the full width of the rear garden, and that the building is only about half the width that we can see there shaded in pink. I'm not necessarily wanting to be an advocate for the applicant, but I just want to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. Councillor Stonecombe.
Thank you, Chair. I'm in agreement with Councillor Spalding. I don't think we should be consolidating past errors, which clearly they are. It's it's very difficult to see from these drawings exactly how domineering these extensions are. But if we're adding yet another domineering extension, then, as I say, we are just consolidating past errors, and I don't think we should do this at all. I really don't. I think it's an error, and it will just mean that the next one will be even bigger and worse, and make life even more miserable for people living in basement flats. So I'm not happy at all. Thank you.
That's helpful. Thank you for your view. Any other views from colleagues before we move to vote on it? No. Okay. Well, I agree. It's a tricky one. Certainly, if it were worse than what was next door, I would have significant concerns about it. Seems to me it's slightly less bad, as it were, than what's next door, because it's, I think, a slightly slimmer extension, and the roof terrace, we've heard from Katie, is the same size as, or the same depth as the ones either side. Certainly we're extremely conscious of the overlooking problems that this may create, but we've got to balance that with whether this development proposed is acceptable in planning terms. So I think with that we will move to vote on the recommendation, and I will go through each of the councillors and ask them how they vote. The recommendation is to grant planning permission with the conditions listed in section 9 of this report, and I don't think there are any changes in the addendum to this recommendation, are there?
Only just some corrections to the text. There's nothing of note.
Nothing substantive. Okay. So, Councillor Dent-Code, first of all.
I refuse, Chair.
Councillor Spalding.
I'm also against, Chairman.
Councillor Evans. Oh, I beg your pardon. Recused. Councillor Woodger.
In favour, Chair.
And I'm in favour, and because I have the casting vote, that is approved on that basis. So thank you very much. And we now move to Elgin Crescent, please.
All right, thank you, Chairman. Hopefully you can hear me clearly. So the second application this evening concerns number 103 Elgin Crescent. There are three aspects to the proposals before you, namely a single-storey basement beneath the building, a side extension, and then the demolition and the rebuilding of the roof and the raising of the roof. That the first image there is obviously the front elevation of the building. You can see there the existing side extension, which wouldn't change. The proposed side extension is actually down at the lower level, so that particular image wouldn't change. Note there the existing roof. It's not exactly in its original form. But I mean, clearly it's, in overall terms, it still follows its original form. We'll come back to that shortly. In terms of section, in this image you can see there the single-storey basement that's proposed beneath the building, down here at the bottom of the image. And you can see there, if you look at the top of the image, you can see in a dotted line where I'm running the cursor, that's the profile of the existing roof, and then the proposed roof you can see in the darker grey. You can see the structure of the roof built above that existing profile. So you can see there, in fact, from that image, you can see how the slope of the roof would steepen slightly, and obviously it would rise slightly to get closer to the chimney pots that you see on top of the chimney stack. Within the space, you can see the reason why that is proposed. Essentially, the existing single height space at roof level would then have a floor level inserted within it to create an extra level, which would be bedroom 5 to the property. And in that image, you can see the proposed basement. So you can see a large media room and gymnasium. There's also a utility room and a plant room. Oh, sorry. And then that shows the garden plan, showing the proximity of 2 lime trees at the rear. You'll have seen from the reports that, subject to the tree preservation details that have been submitted, our arboriculturists are satisfied with the proposals. And that's the lower ground floor plan, and you can see there at the bottom of the image is the proposed side extension, and then the main property, obviously, to its above that in the image. And then that's the proposed side elevation. Note there that there's no longer the section through the roof, that's the side elevation of the proposed roof. And that's the existing rear elevation of the property. You can see there on the right-hand image, that's the application property. And you can see on the left-hand image, that's actually number 105, which effectively faces the application property across the gap. Note that both properties up at roof level have a dormer window, but number 105 has got its bottle balustrade along the rear. It also has it at the front. And part of the proposal for number 103 is to add or replace the bottle balustrade for number 103. And then that's another image taken from the gardens at the rear with the application property, again towards the right. And then that's a more distant image from the gardens, so you can see the context. And you can see there that the roof line can be seen very clearly from the gardens. So that the application property there is to the right-hand side of the gap. And then number 105 with its bottle balustrade is there on the left-hand side. And then in drawing terms, that shows the rear elevation with the bottle balustrade reinstated. And then at the front, that shows again the relationship between the two properties. So you can see there at the front as well, 105 has its bottle balustrade, but not number 103. And then that's the proposed front elevation. And that's the last slide, Chairman. One thing that I would say here is that if the committee is minded to grant planning permission, at the moment that there's nothing actually in the conditions that would require the benefits in the proposals. So the benefits, in particular the bottle balustrade, and also improvements to mouldings and so on. But rather than simply permitting them, obviously, that they would be necessary to outweigh the impact of the roof. So if the committee is minded to grant permission, then I'd recommend a condition requiring those benefits to be instated rather than simply permitting them. But that's obviously if you decide that permission is to be granted.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor. And we have two registered speakers this evening. We have Mrs. Lambert from the Ladbroke Association and Mr. Child. And you also have between you 3 minutes to explain why you're opposed to this application. When you're ready, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. I'm Graham Child. I'm a resident...
Sorry, do you mind taking off your mask, please, because I can't hear you very clearly. Thank you.
Of course, thank you. I understand. I'm sorry. My name's Graham Child. I'm a resident a few doors along. This property gives on to what I think is fair to say is an iconic communal garden. As many will know, it was, for what it's worth, it was the subject of the famous film Notting Hill. I take the view that the issue, as far as I'm concerned, is just the aesthetic one about the symmetry, and I'm very glad that a photograph has been left up there, although that's not the exact photograph that shows the point I'm concerned about, which is the raising of the level of that roof, so that they will be out of symmetry. The one on each, thank you, the one on the left is at a certain level. The one on the right will be raised up. It will the pitch, the roof line will go, as it were. It'll be further up the chimney stack. You can, when you look at the side elevation as proposed in the drawing, it does show. You only just see the pots peeking out above, whereas I think if you, unfortunately, the side elevation as existing doesn't show the stack and the pots, but I think if it did, you would see rather more of the stack, and that's my only point. point that this is very important, this gap, that there are two significant gaps looking out onto between the houses that look out onto the communal garden. Of course, the same sort of issues arise from the other side, but frankly, I'm thinking from the garden side, obviously, but I think you can make much the same points from the other side. I think that's covered, and I appreciate that there are benefits, that there was moulding and the bottle balustrade, which is, these are all very good things, and we're very much in favour of that, but I think it's still important that the balance, the symmetry should be retained. So those are my points. I think Ms. Lambert would like to make some comment.
Thank you. Yes, there are 3 terraces along Elgin Crescent. They are all symmetrical with these bookends with roofs that appear slightly higher. They are indeed some of the best in the borough, probably, in terms of beautiful terraces. And symmetry is one of the most important characteristics. The Ladbroke Association always looks out for people who try to interfere with our terraces. But in this case, it's not just us, it's the residents, and you've had 9 objections, most of which are concerned about this, and we did not put them up to it. They all did it perfectly spontaneously. If the roof is raised up to the top of the chimney pot, it will be the highest roof on the whole, or on any of the 3 terraces. It will create a precedent which will be difficult to ignore if other people want to do the same. And the designs of our Victorian ancestors, with their classical training, will not be maintained. So although it seems a small thing, it's actually, from our point of view, it's really important that we keep these terraces with their symmetry.
Thank you very much indeed. And there are no speakers registered in favour, so we now move to offer the committee the opportunity to put questions to the objectors. Councillor Evans.
Thank you for your presentation. I see the objectors are all very knowledgeable. It's impressive. Could you tell me, the balustrade, is that, what period would you say a balustrade represents, and would you say that it is out of design with this set of houses, or out of period?
This is a question to Mrs. Lambert, is it, possibly?
I can answer.
Yes.
Please.
If Derek agrees. They're built about 1850, and they were all built with balustrades. Over the years, most of them have crumbled away, and so to replace the balustrades is to bring them back to what they were, and we support it.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Councillor Spalding.
For Ms. Lambert, in your written objection, in the general paragraph at the end, you say, given the willingness of the applicants to restore some of the lost historic features of the building, we hope they'll appreciate the changes to the roof. Are you sort of asking us to balance those up? The restoration of certain features is balanced against the change to the roof level?
No, I'm sorry, I obviously didn't express myself clearly. What I was trying to say is that given that the applicants clearly have a sense of history, in that they want to restore the balustrade and certain other features, we were hoping they would extend that sense of history to maintaining the roof at its current level.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to clarify with the objectors, please. Are you happy with everything else in the scheme apart from the roofs?
Happy is perhaps not entirely the word, but we are not objecting to it.
Okay, thank you very much.
We never like basements.
Thanks. Colleagues, it looks as though there are no further questions to the objectors, so we'll thank you both very much for your time. It's very helpful indeed. And if there are any questions for Mr. Taylor, Councillor Dencode first.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I want to ask about this whole issue with it. We always bang our head up against, which is precedent. There is no precedent for raising the roof. Certainly, restoration of original features is not to be fought for any price. But given that there is no precedent, and this is an original and very unique terrace. How on earth, we can't use the excuse for precedent to agree it, and if we did, it would then set a precedent and there would be endless extensions, no doubt, in the future. So on what basis could we say this stops now because there is no precedent for this and it would interrupt the roof line, as we've heard about very eloquently and all the letters explain in great detail? Why on earth would we want to set a precedent in something which is so unique?
Well, I mean, I don't think this is a question of precedent at all. I'm not aware of an exactly similar situation that an applicant could cite as being a precedent. I think that the applicants would say that many of the roofs along here have been altered. So in terms of the proposal being an alteration to a roof, that this is not unusual, and that would probably be true. But there's no precedent in terms of the precise height or angle that they're proposing here, or the relationship with the chimney stack. I think it's not a matter of precedent. I don't think it would particularly set a precedent for the same reasons. I mean, it's a unique set of circumstances. And the circumstances here really are a question of balancing the harm against the benefit. I mean, you'll have seen in the officer reports, I mean, I think our conclusion as officers is that to increase the angle of the roof slope and to raise its height against the chimney is a harm. I mean, clearly it's departing from the original character and form, and I think it would have to be construed as a harm. On the other hand, it's not a massive harm. I suspect to the untutored eye it may not be that noticeable, but we would notice it, and I mean, it would have to be a harm. On the other hand, the reinstatement of the other features that they're proposing would be a benefit. So it does become a question of weighing the benefit against the harm, and there would only be two conclusions: either the benefits would outweigh that harm, or they wouldn't. So it really is on balance. I mean, I completely understand what the Residents' Association objectors are saying, and it is a matter of weighing that harm against the benefits.
I have two quick questions, if I may, Mr. Taylor. One is, this isn't a listed building, so do our historic buildings officers consider these these applications when they're not for listed buildings, or is it just the general officers, as it were? That's the first question.
No, in fact, this was the subject of several conversations with our conservation colleagues.
Conservation officers,
yeah.
That's what I meant. Yeah.
I mean, so it isn't listed, but clearly, I mean, these are key buildings in the conservation area.
Yeah.
I mean, they're key both from views from the street and views from the gardens. So
the view of officers is informed by the input of the conservation officers?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
That was the first question. And the second one is, am I right in thinking that because this is a fairly integral part of what is being applied for, we couldn't condition out the roof part of the application?
You're quite correct. I mean, it's too large a part of the proposals. So the whole application would stand or fall if you found against the roof alteration.
I see. Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Woodger, did you have a question?
Well, you stole my question, which was how much can you reasonably amend it? I guess you can't obviously amend the roof, not to do the roof change, but do everything else. Yeah, that was my question too.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly you could condition out a window or something, but you can't condition out a third of the application effectively.
No, I understand that. All right. Well, unless there are any further questions from Mr. Taylor, it's for us to put our heads together and see what we think. From my perspective, the potential harm that would be caused by the roof is, I think, quite substantial here. I think it blurs the distinction, what is proposed between the top of the roof and the chimney stack. You can see it both in some of the photographs and in, there's one drawing in particular that perhaps Mr. Taylor could kindly bring up. Not that, well, that does show it, but there's one that shows it even better, I think. No, it's a front-on elevation. There. So that is what might be seen, well, from either the garden or the street side, I suppose. That the top of the roof, as proposed, would effectively just be a few inches below the top of the stack and very close to the bottom of the pots. And the architect's distinction between stack and roof is going to be rather lost there, and it would mess up the heights of the roofs in the wider area in the set of terraces. It strikes me, but that's just a view, and I wonder what colleagues think. Councillor Evans.
Well, clearly symmetry is very important here, and it is a very unique area. This is it's really beautiful because of the fact that there is symmetry, and I think we should, I personally will vote against, and I think we should keep this area consistent with, the houses should be consistent because it is an area of beauty.
Councillor Dencade.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I absolutely agree that I don't want to set a precedent, because then we'd be facing more roof extensions, I'm sure, and even if some of them have been altered, they haven't been raised, and it would make a massive difference. This is an unspoilt terrace, and as such, it's very precious, and I think we should keep it that way.
Thank you very much. I'd just add that it is a bit of a shame in a way that, as we heard, we can't really just remove this part of the application, because it seems, broadly speaking, that people are relatively happy with the rest of the application, and there are clearly some benefits which are laudable, such as the reintroduction of the bottle balustrade, and I don't think anyone has any particular difficulties with the basement, which once built at least will be invisible. So the problem really is the roof, by the sounds of things, but as Mr. Taylor said, it stands or falls as one application. So, colleagues, I think, unless there are any further comments from any of you, we'll move to a vote. The recommendation is that the committee grants planning permission with the conditions listed in section 9 of this report. And are there any changes from the addendum? Oh, well, there was the suggestion from Mr. Taylor, wasn't there, that we ought to possibly change the recommendation to include a requirement that the benefits of the scheme are introduced. Is that right?
Yes, Chairman. I was recommending that if permission is granted, then we should include a condition that requires them to carry out those benefits, the ones identified in paragraph 4.1 in the report. So that should be converted into a condition that requires them to do that.
So, yeah, without knowing yet whether permission is going to be granted or not, though, we need to amend the condition, do we not?
No, that would be an additional condition.
Yeah, but we need to be voting on the recommendation with the amended condition, do we not?
Yes, you would vote on the recommendation with the amended condition, which is effectively part of the recommendation, because I've just recommended it.
I see. Okay. So what we will be voting on is the recommendation with Mr. Taylor's suggestion that the benefits are enforced, if you like, as part of any permission that may be granted. So I'll go in a different order this time. Councillor Woodger.
Due to relative harm of the roof, to refuse.
Thank you. Councillor Evans.
Refuse.
Councillor Spalding.
I would actually grant this, Chairman. I'm in favour.
Councillor Dentcode.
Refuse.
And I'm also against. So planning permission is refused on that basis. We need. Yes.
Yeah, now the recommendation has fallen, you do obviously have to go on and consider reasons for refusal
Yeah.
and vote on those.
Quite. Thank you very much for that. And so, do we need to do a motion for refusal, or
Yeah,
does that come second?
It sounds to me as though obviously the reason for refusal are all to do with the roof, but the committee does have to formulate reasons for refusal for the decision notice.
So,
and
Mr.
that
Taylor
has to be, moved and seconded in the normal
Mr.
way.
Taylor, I think, will help us articulate why we refused that.
Certainly, Chairman. I mean, I think it just flows directly from the discussion. I mean, to summarise, I think what you would be voting on would be the fact that in your opinion, the harm that would result from the roof extension would not be outweighed by other parts of the proposals, and therefore the character and appearance of the conservation area would not be preserved.
Thank you very much. And so we now need to vote on those reasons for refusal. Could we have a proposer of a motion to refuse on those grounds? Councillor Woodger, and a seconder, please. Councillor Dentcode, I saw first. Thank you very much. So we now need to vote on that motion. Councillor Woodger, first of all.
I vote in favour of the motion.
And Councillor Evans.
In favour of the motion.
Councillor
Chair.
Spalding.
I'll just abstain on that, Chairman. Thank you.
Councillor Dentcode.
In favour of the motion.
And I'm also in favour of the motion for refusal. So there we are. I think that's all we need to do on that one. Thank you very much. And we now move to Sloane Square.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Just a couple of slides to talk you through on this one. So here's the application site. I'm sure you're all familiar with the building on the southeast corner of Sloane Square, above the station. Control of advertisement consent is sought for a shroud to cover the building while scaffolding is erected. The wrap would largely contain an image of the building behind, but there would also be an area of advertising space. As you can see, I hope you can make out, there is a red dotted line on that front elevation where the advertisement would be. It would be illuminated with a few external lamps. This photograph shows you the shroud half in place with an advert in situ on the building. You'll note that advertisement consent has been granted 3 times previously for this. The reason why we are being asked to determine it again is that due to COVID, the building work was delayed. Lastly, I just wanted to draw your attention to the recommended conditions. Firstly, 6 and 7, which control the illumination levels and ensure that it's static. But importantly, condition 8, which limits the period for which the advertisement could be in place up until the 15th of October. The description of development refers to a 7-month period, which of course, if we were to determine this in favour tonight, would extend beyond that date, but the applicant has confirmed that the advertisement would only be in place until the 15th of October, as per that condition. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And we have our colleague, Councillor Kamali, registered to speak against this. As Councillor Spalding noted earlier, of course we all know Councillor Kamali, but I don't think any of us have discussed this particular application with him. So, Councillor Kamali, when you're ready, you've got 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. My argument objecting to this application tonight is hopefully quite simple. We have, by sheer coincidence, two different ways to shroud wraps on construction sites, which happen to be on the same square. Peter Jones, by contrast, is a local institution, is taking, in my view, a sensitive approach and simply placing their own name and announcing that they are open for business as usual, and long may they remain open. Blow Up Media, to the contrary, have already installed their advert, as you've seen tonight, for Burberry under an unconsulted approval, and as of today have seemingly given up on the rest of the hoarding work, stopping simply below the advert. To my mind, this is a clear, deliberate commercialization of the site, and it's apparent to all that see it. The bottom of the half of the site remains unshrouded, and I therefore argue also that the prior permission has therefore yet to be fully implemented. Coming to tonight's fresh application, I would argue just the simple planning items which were mentioned in the report. I believe CL3 in our planning policy states that the council will require development to enhance the local conservation area. I put it to you that this proposal does not enhance the conservation area, no matter how much of a fan of Burberry's products we may be. CR4 also states that the council will resist temporary or permanent advertising hoardings. Again, I think it's pretty clear that this is an advertising hoarding and therefore it must be resisted. And CL2 states that alterations be held to the highest architectural and design standards across the borough, and whilst everyone's taste differs, I can't believe that we would agree that this scheme meets those requirements. That said, the building behind is no thing of architectural beauty, but the shroud covering the non-advertised area does at least mirror the building that sits behind it. And the prior approvals, which we've touched upon, I hope do not necessarily carry weight tonight, as to my knowledge, the public are not consulted on such advertising proposals within the borough, a fact I only learnt once I'd seen the original application go live. I fear this is somewhat of an omission and could actually lead to be the thin end of the wedge for frequent and long-lasting adverts across the borough, maintained through repeat applications, whilst the works they are meant to shroud are never fully completed. We have often seen shrouds across the borough display the building that they hope to build, and I would argue that these are the correct way to do it, and they fit neatly in the townscape. If such approvals as proposed tonight can be repeated frequently, granted simply due to the fact that prior permissions already exist, there is no guarantee that this site will ever be completed. And again, to my knowledge, we have no power to force a developer to finish works, and with the commercial benefit of a high-value advertisement, the economic argument for completed the covered works become ever more tenuous. Given this very high-profile location in a conservation area adjacent to a listed theatre, I worry that this is Piccadilly Circus by stealth, and we should be resolute in opposing such schemes where they provide no public benefit. And I put it to the committee, and I hope they agree. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good timing. And we have no applicant registered to speak, and therefore we move straight to questions from the committee. Councillor Budger.
As the local councillor there, have residents contacted you before about this site? Were you aware of the previous permissions granted?
To be honest, I only found out about the permission being granted via Instagram when I was checking what was going on at Sloane Square. I saw an advert from Blow Up Media saying that they'd now got permission and they were soliciting for companies to take over the building. Initially, my fears were somewhat assuaged when it was a picture of Albert Bridge, a bridge that I'm happy to celebrate, but within very short order it's been replaced by an advert for Burberry, and frankly I see no reason why it would not change again to even less sensitive advertisement. On the local feeling that you touched upon, it has been remarked on. We have pointed out that, of course, the reason we weren't able to object at the time was that these are not consulted with ward councillors, as we have the policy in place. So I'm sort of here tonight to make sure that this doesn't necessarily happen again, but also to hopefully make sure that this one goes away and is replaced by matching building design.
Thank you. Any further questions for Councillor Kamali? No. All right. Well, Councillor Kamali, thank you very much. Very helpful. Colleagues, questions for Katie Harrell? Councillor Spalding.
In the 3 previous iterations of this temporary permission for 7 months, this will be the 4th, the size of the advertising space. In the first one, it was 10 metres by 17. In the second one, it was 10 metres by 7, unless that's a typing mistake. In the third one, the advertising space was not defined. And in this one, we're back to 10 metres by 17. So my first question is, could that be clarified? The second question is, condition 4, no advertisement to be displayed without permission of the owner or any other person. Is the local authority any other person? I.e., does the actual content of the advertisement, which is concerning Councillor Kamali, would that have to come back to officers or committee for the advertising consent of the content of the advert?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, just to clarify on your first point, you're absolutely right. That is a typo, unfortunately, in the second listed in the planning application history table. The size of the advertisement has been consistent throughout the 4 applications. On to condition 4, recommended in the pack. That is one of the standard conditions applied to all advertisement consents, so you'll regularly have seen that. Unfortunately, no, to confirm, we can't control the actual content, so what is actually displayed within an advert. You grant consent for the advertising space and structure, so we can control the size and location and so on, but not the actual content, so not the imagery.
Thank you. Councillor Dent-Coad.
Thank you. I've been devil's advocate here. There don't seem to have been any, well, there have been no written objections, and you've explained that. But from what I understand, the main objection is the content of the advert, because when we were showing something else before, it wasn't an issue. So I'm not quite clear about what this objection is for. Is it because for the wrong advert, or is it for any advert? And there is, I think it's important we try to clarify that, because, as you say, we don't have any say over the content of it at all. And yet we were hearing that previously the image was acceptable. So I'm a bit confused about this. Could you possibly clarify?
So in terms of what officers have deemed acceptable, as I've mentioned, because we don't have control over what image is displayed, our assessment is purely on the principle of any advertisement, any image. Obviously, we might have a preference in terms of what that might be, but in terms of our actual control over that, we don't have any. So we've just determined that the principle of any image there would be acceptable in this instance.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask you, please, to what extent can we take into account the interesting point that Councillor Kamali made about the applicant having possibly rather cynically only shrouded the building as far as the bottom of the advertisement and not carried on with the shrouding further down?
Yes, so I did seek clarification, firstly, from the agent about that after seeing this image. They assure me it is to be completed this week. Obviously, I can't confirm and we can't force them to do that. In terms of what we're assessing today, we are assessing the advertisement, which is just the area you can actually see there within that box. They don't actually need consent for a blank shroud around the scaffolding.
I see. That's helpful. Thank you. Colleagues, any further points that you'd like to make? Councillor Evans.
Well, this could set a precedent, couldn't it? Because we do not have those kind of signs in the area. And I understand Councillor Kamali's point, because the area is most of the advertising, or whatever you want to call it in quotes, is about showing designs of the building that's going up, or architectural features, that kind of thing. We don't have billboards like this, and I don't think we should start with that. I mean, this would start a precedent. You say the law or the regulations are gray. Is that the point, really?
So certainly you're correct in that historically we have tried to resist advertisements such as these on buildings, on the shrouds and wraps on buildings. Unfortunately, we found increasingly that where we have refused and we've been challenged at appeal, that we've been losing those decisions. So the government's planning practice guidance is quite clear that we should be, where possible, looking at ways that we can support these wraps, and it does state that sometimes it is appropriate for advertisement space to be included on these wraps. And so in recent appeal decisions, great weight's been given to that guidance, and we have had our refused advertisement consents overturned on appeal. So we have started to have to give that more weight in our decision making, and that is why in this instance we felt, given there is some sensitivities in terms of the conservation area and buildings around, given that there is still an overall commercial character to that area, in this instance we felt on balance we had to say that we deemed it to be acceptable. That's not to say that this would be acceptable in all locations across the borough. It very much would have to be a site-by-site assessment based on the character of the area.
When you say that it could be overturned, by whom?
So I meant by the inspector when we have refused advertisements similar to this. One such example was on 197 Kensington High Street, and the applicant took that decision to the planning inspectorate, and then the inspector, in making his decision, disagreed with us and allowed the appeal.
Would you say, though, that Ken High Street is similar to Sloane Square? Isn't it more commercial?
It is slightly different in character, absolutely. We're talking about a different high street. I suppose officers have considered that, that Sloane Street is still a shopping area. There are still commercial uses. It's the predominant use in the area. And so that was the judgment made. Obviously, it's up to members to draw their own conclusions on what they think the character of the area is and whether something like this would be appropriate there or not.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Woodger.
If there's a risk of this getting through on appeal, would it be reasonable to grant but shorten the period more than just October, shorten it to September?
I wouldn't necessarily say that this will end up at appeal, but it is obviously an option open to any applicant. The fact that it's already there, I don't know how that might influence what they would decide to do if members were to refuse it. In terms of the length of period it can be up, that is within your gift to change if you felt it needed to be. We are only talking about 4 months, and I suppose the question to members would be, what would we ask them to do at the end?
Or trying to discourage them doing it, basically. As I said, if there's a risk of this getting through on appeal, at least if it's in our control, damage limitation in terms of make sure it's not up for too long. That's my suggestion.
I mean, being really blunt here, if they were to appeal the decision, there is no way a decision from the planning inspectorate would come through before the 4-month period that we're talking about anyway.
That was the point I was about to make too. So, yeah, highly unlikely. I know the length of time taken for planning appeals. So, colleagues, I think for me it's more about the principle of whether we permit it or not, rather than necessarily the length of time. Strikes me anyway that we probably ought to resist, where possible, the introduction of large advertisements in gems of the borough, and Sloane Square is one such gem. We will see later on how hoarding can be done on Peter Jones without large advertisements, and to my mind it's more in keeping with the borough, but that is very much my personal view, and you're all of course at liberty to take an opposing view. If anyone wants to make any further comments, this is your last opportunity to do so, otherwise we'll move to a vote. All right, well, the recommendation is that the committee grants advertisement consent with the conditions listed in section 9 of this report. Councillor Woodger.
To refuse.
Councillor Evans.
Refuse, please.
Councillor Spalding.
Refuse, Chairman.
Councillor Dentcode.
Refuse.
And I'm also against it. So, as before, we need to identify the reasons. Is that right, with an advertisement consent as well as a planning permission?
Yes, so to be clear, under the advertisement regs, there are two considerations, which is visual amenity and public safety. And from the discussion, I picked up that it's the visual amenity side that members are concerned about, linked to the policies that we heard Councillor Kamali raise in his objection. So we can draft a reason for refusal that picks up on those points.
Very good. And do we need a motion? As before, a motion for why we're refusing it? Yes. Do you want to make a point, Councillor Spalding, or are you proposing a motion?
Yeah, Chairman, would it be another reason that we've given this applicant 3 bites of the cherry and they haven't shrouded the whole building, which is what their permission was granted for? It says a one-to-one image of the building facade, and they haven't done that. I think that's a very good reason why we don't give them a 4th chance.
I'm not sure that's one of the grounds for us considering.
I mean, it could certainly be noted in the minutes, I would say, that that there is some dissatisfaction that has not happened, but I don't think it should form part of the reason for refusal for this, as this is a new proposal, albeit, yeah, we can certainly note the disappointment that it wasn't carried out.
Okay, sorry.
Has the advert been displayed up to now under various consents?
So it went up fairly recently, I believe in May. The current consent, the latest one, expired on the 1st of June, so there is no overlap.
Okay, you might want to consider, because we've given consent before, I'm just trying to think of our position at appeal, you might want to consider, I think what Councillor Spalding was saying about the cumulative impact and I guess the ongoing harm, or the harm that would be caused by allowing them to continue to have this advert for a prolonged period of time. You might want to think about including something like that, because otherwise the inspector's going to ask the natural question, why have you allowed consent 3 times or twice or whatever times it is, and now suddenly you're saying no. So I do think we probably need to weave that into the refusal reason as well.
So it sounds as though we might be saying something like the cumulative impact on visual amenity and the harm to visual amenity that will be caused by the cumulative impact would be our reason for refusal. Yep. Ongoing, prolonged, continuing impact. I'll leave the precise wording to officers, but thank you very much indeed. That's a helpful suggestion.
Chairman, sorry, can I just, is the advert up there now? Because you'd probably also have to delegate authority, I don't know, to consider taking enforcement action. I don't know, is the advert already?
It is currently there, so it was erected under the previous consent, but you're right in that consent I checked expired on the 1st of June. So you're absolutely right. If members are to refuse this current application, then they might want to delegate the authority to us to then look at enforcement action to get the advert removed that's still in place.
Colleagues, do we agree that we should delegate authority for enforcement action? I think to be consistent we should. Yeah. Okay.
Was there a motion for the...
yeah, so we're now going to move to a motion to deal with, I think, both those aspects, both the continuing prolonged cumulative impact on visual amenity of the advertisement remaining in place, and to delegate authority to our enforcement officers to deal with the advertisement that's permission has now expired. So could I see someone proposing that motion, please? Councillor Dentcode, and someone seconding? Councillor Evans. So we now vote on that motion, and Councillor Woodger. In favour? Councillor Evans.
In favour.
Councillor Spalding.
In favour.
Councillor Dentcode.
In favour.
And I'm also in favour. Thank you very much. So planning permission is refused, or sorry, advertisement consent is refused on that basis. We now move to Portobello Road. Portobello Road.
All right, thank you, Chairman. You'll have seen from the report, obviously, that this proposal has a number of elements to it. Set out in paragraph 4.2 of the report are the retrospective elements. In other words, that these are things that the pub restaurant have already carried out. And then in paragraph 4.4, there are a couple of things remaining that have not been done, so they're not retrospective. And those are the movement of 3 existing air conditioning units to another position and the erection of an aluminium screen of 1.25 metres in height around the rear. So all of the aspects, the retrospective ones and the newly proposed ones, they form the application. Just to give you some context, the first slide there shows the rear of the public house as it was in October 2017. So you can see there, very, very clearly at that time, there was a large kitchen extract duct at the centre of the rear elevation, and then there was an amount of trellis work and other stuff up at roof level. So that's just providing some context. That's what it was like in 2017. And then that's the rear elevation as existing before they carried out the part works that are now the subject of the application. So you can see there the central duct and then the structures at roof level. And that's a photograph of the rear taken last year. I haven't been there since last year, but I think the rear elevation is still as you see it there. And you can see there that the large central duct has now been moved across to the right-hand side to the corner. And then you can see that there is now rooftop plants that you can see in the top left, coloured grey. That's part of the new kitchen extract system. That replaces the old duct, in part at least. And that's just a closer-up image of the rooftop kitchen extract. And that's a more distant image. The important thing, I think, to note from this image is that the right-hand wall there that you see clearly, that's actually the flank wall of St. Peter's Church. So St. Peter's is a Grade 2 listed building. And obviously anything that would harm its setting clearly should be resisted. On the other hand, the fact that you see something in the same view is a different thing to harming the setting of a building. And that the conclusion in the report before you is that, yes, the rooftop equipment can be seen, but that doesn't in itself harm the setting of St. Peter's Church. In plan terms, the image shown there is the full roof plan. The top of the image is actually the rear of the building, and then the sort of bottom part of the image is the front of the building. You can see there on the right-hand side the rooftop plant that has been installed, and then the blue line that runs around it is the proposed screen that would obscure the plant behind it. And then in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see there's a small area of screen that has already been installed. So that part of the roof plan is retrospective. And then that's the side elevation, showing the rooftop plant sort of hidden behind the proposed screen that would run around the periphery of the roof. And you see there the new flue at the right-hand side of the image. And that was the last slide, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor. And we have some speakers registered to speak on this one. We've got, first of all, Mr. Crump on behalf of St. Peter's Church, and Nick, I think, on behalf of Lawrence Kelly. So, first of all, you have 3 minutes between you to explain why you're opposed to this application, please. I beg your pardon? Neither's okay, I beg your pardon. It's just Mr. Crump on behalf of St. Peter's Church. So you have 3 minutes all to yourself.
Good evening, Chairman. Yes, I'm the sole representative at St. Peter's Church, objecting to this. I'm a qualified architect. with 48 years experience, and I've lived and worked in the area for 40 years. I specialise in residential and commercial refurbishment, and I have substantial knowledge of air conditioning and extract ventilation. The officer's report states the proposed mechanical plant will comply with the development plan and statutory tests for a conservation area, but I failed to see in the officer's report how that can be convincing. The officer's report states the proposals will preserve and enhance the character and appearance of the conservation area, and I find this a very strange and unsubstantiated remark. The officer's report also states the proposals will not have a harmful effect on the living conditions enjoyed by neighbours, with all the plant and equipment, air conditioning on top of the roof. I don't agree. The officer further asks whether the proposals will have an acceptable impact on air quality, allowing a wood-burning oven or stove, when in the report it states that the entire borough is designated as an air quality management area due to seriously elevated levels of nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter, which are harming residents' health. And it also states that wood burning can exacerbate the problem. Previously, in another report, it was stated that this would have an unacceptable impact on air quality. So I'm not quite sure why the council have changed their mind and will allow this. The officer also says in the report, paragraph 6.3, the installed single rear flue, which is a shiny, prominent stainless steel flue, has a neutral impact to the appearance of the property and conservation area and setting of the listed church, which is an important heritage asset. Further, in a previous report, it stated that the installed plant on the roof is substantial in size and reads as a bulky addition to the roof. The size and prominent siting would fail to preserve the character and appearance of the conservation area and setting of the listed church. So my assessment is that the measures proposed will not stop unacceptable noise from the plant and air conditioning, nor will it prevent unacceptable odours and fumes, and therefore I think that planning permission should be refused on these grounds.
Thank you very much for that. That's very helpful. And then we have Mr. Phillips, the agent of the applicant, registered to speak as well. You have 3 minutes when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Just to give some context, I myself have 30 years' experience as a planning consultant solely advising the hospitality trade and advise on circa 200 pubs and restaurants across London and the UK each year. The officer's report fully sets out the background to this proposal, and after 21 months of working with planning and environmental health officers, the applicant welcomes the recommendation for approval. The proposed kitchen extract and associated plant equipment are essential to enable the long-standing local community pub operation to continue to trade. The roof plant is quite typical for an operation of this kind and is quite usual in design, scale and appearance. It has replaced far more unsightly plant equipment, and numerous other roof structures that have been erected over the years have been removed. The applicant is firmly of the opinion that the appearance of the building will be improved once the development is completed by replacing the noisier, unsightly kitchen extraction equipment, elevation flues and other rooftop paraphernalia, and that this will have a positive impact upon the surrounding street scene. As can be interpreted from the consented scheme of plant and extraction equipment at Core Restaurant, immediately behind the application site, which is link attached to St Peter's Church, this has been considered to be appropriate development within a commercial part of the conservation area. The rear view of the rooftop, in the photos that you've seen, can only be seen from a private service courtyard and this passageway between the buildings underneath the link attachment. The applicant does not believe that the comments from the church outweigh the very many public benefits derived from the recent refurbishment and reopening of this important local community facility, which is enjoyed to a great extent by the local residents and businesses and provides substantial local employment to circa 25 people and significant trade for local businesses and suppliers. During recovery from the devastating impact of the pandemic, paragraph 80 of NPPF has been quoted by many planning practitioners. It states that planning decisions should help create the conditions in which businesses can invest, expand and adapt. Significant weight should be placed on the need to support economic growth and productivity, taking into account both local business needs and the wider opportunities for development. This approach is very relevant to this case. In conclusion, the applicant trusts that members will support the continued trade of this local community facility and will agree with the officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. That's very helpful. And now we have the opportunity for colleagues to put questions to either the objectors or the applicants. And perhaps you could make clear, please, Councillor Jenko, to whom your question is addressed.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask Mr. Crump, with his many years' experience, given the business that is operating there, do you know of other ways of, are there better ways of creating air conditioning and flues for wood-burning stoves, which there are many, and they are poisoning us all, of course? Are there better ways of doing it than what has been proposed, do you think? Or is this the best that you could get from the work that is the services that are being created at this pub?
Well, I assume that the applicants have tried to do the best that they can from the point of view of the equipment that they're installing, and they've stated that they're trying to introduce noise suppression and odor suppression as well from the equipment, but it's a very substantial amount of plant on top of what is not a particularly large building, and the concern is that the smell from the extract and the vibration and noise from the air conditioning will not be suitably suppressed. Now, of course, the environmental health officer has come up with the conclusion that that there shouldn't be too much noise and smell, and if there is, and there is a condition that the pub would be told to stop using the equipment. So there is this dilemma, if consent is granted, that in a few months' time that they would have to cease operating because the smell and the noise, well, they say the condition is if the smell actually permeates beyond the boundary of the property, then this will be in contravention of a condition. And I don't really see how, with this amount of extraction equipment on the roof, you're going to be able to stop smell from emanating beyond the boundary of the property, and I don't think that you're going to be able to stop what will be a noticeable humming noise from the air conditioning. And I suppose the important issue here is that this all has to be taken into account, bearing in mind it is immediately adjacent to a very beautiful church. It's almost unique in the borough. And I just don't think that has been taken into account in enough detail.
And do you know, Mr. Crump, if the adjacent properties are lived in, are they flats above shops, or do you know, or not?
Yes, there are. There are adjoining residential units that will be substantially inconvenienced as a result of this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a question for Mr. Crump as well. Would you and the church that you represent be happy, happy is possibly the wrong word, be less unhappy if the screen that is proposed were left out of the development proposed around the plant on the roof?
Well, the whole idea of having the screen was, well, it was partly to disguise the air conditioning plant and equipment, but also it is supposed to be able to help screen some of the sound. Whether that would be the case, I really can't tell.
So is your concern primarily visual or noise and smells, or is it all of the above?
I think it's a combination of all of it.
Right.
I think that with the amount of rooftop plant, you can see very clearly some of it's visible there, and we just feel that it's out of keeping in context with the proximity of the listed church next door.
Yeah. So it strikes me that having the screen, if it's a opaque screen where those railings are that are clearly sort of semi-transparent, would alter entirely the profile and silhouette of the building. It would read as a much taller, bulkier block. So I was just wondering to myself whether a possible compromise might be to get rid of the screen and live with what's there. It's just a thought. That would not be acceptable to you, is that right?
Well, nothing is actually shown from the point of view of how the screen would actually appear. I think that's the concern. But I mean, also, it's a combination of several factors. Obviously, we're concerned about the noise and the odours that will emanate from the extraction.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Colleagues, any further questions for applicant or objector? No, in which case thank you both very much, that's very helpful, and we'll now move to questions to Mr. Taylor. Councillor Woodger, first of all.
Can we look back what was originally there in the presentation?
Sorry, the photograph?
Yeah. That's what's
sorry,
now
the 2017 one.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, obviously we haven't got a picture of the same angle, so but fine.
Yeah, the angles are slightly different, but
those railing, do they have any actual function, the railings that used to be there?
I really don't know, to be honest.
Okay.
I think they had some sort of terrace up there actually, but
the piping, how it looks now, looks much better. The issue is obviously that the big silver thing in the corner, which is now there. But I mean, personally, I think it is what it is, unless they stopped operating as a pizza place. No, okay. No, I just wanted to see the images.
Any other questions, colleagues? Mr. Taylor? Councillor Evans?
There are rules in terms of where the flue is placed. So I'm asking you that you are satisfied with where the top of the flue comes out.
Well, I think that there are two things to think about. I mean, firstly is the view of the planning authority, which would be your view, and then the other is the view of the authority as in terms of noise and odour, in other words, our environmental health officers. Our environmental health officers almost always prefer kit and equipment to be up at roof level, because that's where noise and odour are minimised. So they'd always prefer stuff to be up at roof level rather than lower down, even though as planners that the view might rather be to put them lower down where they're not so visible. In terms of ducts and so on, then the planning view would normally be to locate a duct in a corner where it's less visible rather than smack in the middle of an elevation where it would be more visible. So I think what you see before you, in planning terms, the duct in the corner would be the best place for it. And then in environmental health terms, having the main extract equipment on the roof would be the best place for it. Obviously the planning decision then has to take into account the appearance of the roof. But I think that's really how it breaks down.
Excellent, thank you.
Councillor Dinkett.
Thank you. It's just a quick one, Mr. Taylor. Where are we in planning with wood-burning stoves?
I think, wood-burning stoves specifically are not mentioned in any planning policy. Obviously, air quality is, and some character and appearance are. Our environmental health officers, I think, would have had concerns over some larger wood-burning stove. In this case, they were satisfied that the scale of the flue and the scale of the stove, particularly using very dry wood that doesn't produce as much smoke, they actually concluded that they wouldn't have an objection to it. So, had they concluded otherwise, then you probably wouldn't have the recommendation before you. But their considered opinion was that the scale of it and the type of fuel used for it simply wouldn't constitute an environmental health or air quality issue. That's not to say other wood-burning devices might not do. That they could well do.
Thank you. I would just like to explore this screen point. I know we had a not entirely enthusiastic uptake from Mr. Crump on my suggestion, but I still have some concerns about it. What is there we could do about the screen, and do you have a view on whether it's appropriate in planning terms?
That's a difficult question, Chairman. I think the officer view was that the screen would serve to hide the plant behind it and therefore be a benefit. So I think in discussions with the applicant, there's been quite a lot of discussion as to what form a screen would take in order to hide the equipment behind it. And to be absolutely honest, I don't think officers actually asked the view, well, would it be preferable not to have the screen at all? I think there's always been the idea that the best thing to do with the plant would be to obscure it as far as possible. In terms of your idea, is the screen actually necessary? It's not necessary for acoustic purposes. The passive screen that you can't see in the photographs, but it's towards the front of the building, that does have an acoustic function, so the environmental health requirement would be to retain that. But the screen at the rear is only there for visual purposes. It doesn't have it's not necessary for acoustic purposes. So you could, of course, conclude that the screen wasn't necessary in visual terms. If that was your conclusion, then it would be easy enough to amend the application to take out the screen, because it's only one small part of the proposal.
Thank you. I'll discuss that with colleagues. I'm conscious that it might seem a bit inconsistent, because quite often I'm certainly advocating, putting hoarding or a housing around an air conditioning unit or something like that. But here it strikes me that this is slightly different and rather changes the whole profile of the building and makes everything sort of more boxy and with a dark silhouette. So I'll discuss that with colleagues and see if we've got a view. Anyone have a view on that? And if it's just me who thinks that might be a good idea, I'm happy to drop it. But
I know I'd prefer it would be a row of bricks, but that's probably a bit too much. So I would probably leave it as is with what's proposed. But
sorry, you'd probably.
I'd probably leave it as being proposed, as opposed to take it away. But others may feel different.
Okay. Councillor Dinkett?
I just think either way is ugly, frankly, very ugly. So it's not good. And as you say, if it raises the profile, the look at the profile of the roof, that's, we've had to resist an awful lot of attempted developments and roofs and heaven knows what down that stretch of Portobello, which is, it's strictly 2 stories, and they should be kept as such a, that shouldn't, we need to maintain that. But certainly from the rear, either way is ugly, I think.
Yeah, well, I agree with that, but I suppose what I'm trying to do is make it slightly less ugly, but still acceptable, and allow this plant, which seems to be necessary for the purposes of running the business. Anyway, One final question for Mr. Taylor, sorry. What are the materials proposed for the screen?
It's proposed in aluminium, Chairman. So it'd be a grey aluminium.
Right. Well, colleagues, it sounds as though we've discussed that enough. So you've heard two different points of view, and the recommendation is that the committee grants planning permission with the conditions listed in section 9 of this report. Councillor Dentcode.
I can't decide either way. I'm going to abstain because I really can't decide. I think it's all pretty grim, frankly.
Thank you. Councillor Spaulding.
Grant, Chairman.
Councillor Evans.
I like your idea.
I wish you'd spoken up sooner, and then we might have incorporated it. But I think it's too late now. We're voting on the recommendation as it is.
This is a really tough one. It is ugly. So we cannot put in a condition.
I think we need to proceed with the vote on the recommendation as before us, and rather than amend it, because some people have already voted on it.
I'm going to have to abstain.
Right. Councillor Woodger.
In favour, Chair.
I'm afraid I'm going to vote against it because I can't reconcile myself to the screen. So there we are with 2 abstentions, 2 in favour and 1 against. So planning permission is granted on that basis. Okay. We move to Uxbridge Street. Please.
Okay, yeah, if you could turn to the first application in the North Pack for 16 Uxbridge Street. The proposal before you basically is to erect a boundary wall, or erect a section of wall on top of the existing boundary between numbers 14 and 16 Uxbridge Street. Now, the application is actually made by number 16, and I've identified the properties in this slide. So you can see that 16 in this photograph is the property on the right-hand side of the slide, and then 14 is there to the left-hand side. At the moment, the property boundary, you can see sort of roughly at the centre of the slide. There's a boundary wall that you can see at the bottom, which has in this image 4 pots on it, and then to the left of that, at the centre, containing the rosemary, is a grey planter. And essentially the comparison, I think, before you is to compare the impact of the grey planter with the rosemary in it with the proposed boundary wall. The railings that you see at the left-hand side are obviously existing, and they're to a height of 1100 millimetres, which is the building regulations requirement for a boundary to a terrace. And the wall is proposed to replace the grey planter and to the same height of 1100 millimetres. So the wall would therefore be to the same height as you see there as the railing running back to the main wall in place of the planter. That view is taken looking across, so you can see there the balcony or terrace roof to number 14 in the foreground, and then number 16 obviously behind it. Keep an eye on the terrace roof, because that's actually glass, which forms a large part of the neighbours' contributions to this in terms of impact on their property. So that's actually a glass roof at the moment. It's walk-on glass. That's the closer image of it. I mean, in the photographs, it doesn't look glass at first glance, but it is. And and that's what it looks like from underneath. So if I go back to the last image, you can see there the railings to the terrace, the neighbour's terrace at number 14 on the right-hand side, and then you can see the shadow of those railings on the glass roof above. And in elevation terms, the top part of the image there shows the existing planter, and then the lower part shows the 1100 millimetre high wall. You can see that the planter there is actually 600 millimetres in height, and it's replaced by a wall in the proposals of 1100 millimetres. The addendum report points out a couple of corrections from the main report, because the height differential clearly is 500 millimetres, not 200, as the report does say in one position. And that's just one. That image is taken before they started to develop number 16 at the rear. But I just thought it was useful to see the position of the planter as it was before the present sequence started. So that's taken from the application property looking towards number 14. And you can see there the whole boundary wall. That's the last slide, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And we have Mr. Leggett registered to speak against the application, Mr. Hussain, who is, I believe, the applicant, registered to speak in favour. So we hear first of all from Mr. Leggett, and you have 3 minutes when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've prepared a wonderful speech. I really hope to get through it in 3 minutes, but having heard Mr. Taylor's presentation, I wish I could kind of start it again, but I'm going to go for it. Let me get on with it. My name is Grant Leggett, Director and Head of Planning at Boyer Planning Consultancy. I speak tonight on behalf of the owner of number 14, who's the most affected neighbour. I intend to raise 3 issues. The first is that the officer's report contains errors and is flawed. The report fails to understand...
Chair, we can't hear him, sorry.
Sorry, people are struggling to hear you.
Forgive me.
Could you have the microphone a bit closer still and speak into it?
Is that any better, Chair?
I think you need to get a bit closer to it still.
Is that any better? I'm sorry about that.
It's getting better.
The report fails to understand the site's circumstances. Firstly, it states that the roof light above the kitchen and living room at number 14 below is frosted glass, which it is not. It is clear glass, albeit currently very dirty following a prolonged period of building works. The officer also states that the level of overlooking would be the same as existing. This fails to appreciate that there was previously no terrace at a point so near the boundary from which overlooking could be caused, and the approved terrace was only allowed on the basis that it was set back from the boundary. And this is the point where I feel there is a bit of a gap here, but I shall continue anyway. But these are nonetheless fundamentally important matters that are misreported in the officer's report. The report also fails to address how the current proposals can be acceptable where they reintroduce items which were previously unacceptable and required by the previous officer to be amended out in order to make that previous application acceptable. The previous officer's report and subsequent correspondence with that officer make very clear that the potential for overlooking from the terrace through the glazed roof into the kitchen and living space below and the sense of enclosure of that space were harmful to living conditions at number 14. This committee report fails to address why a different decision should now be reached on those matters. The second item which then follows is, had the officer understood the site circumstances properly with the benefit of a site visit perhaps, she would see that planning permission should be refused here on the grounds that the proposal would harm living conditions at number 14 from overlooking and loss of privacy and from sense of enclosure. This was the conclusion of the previous officer who did have the benefit of visiting the site pre-COVID. It was for these reasons that the previous officer correctly required an integrated planter to be retained in its position, set back from the edge of the property boundary to prevent this overlooking and reduced sense of enclosure. And again, therein lies the gap here. It was unacceptable then and is unacceptable now, and it is for these reasons we consider planning permission should be refused. There is a final point. I'm going to race through it quick as I can. Part of the premise of this application is that there needs to be an 1100mm party wall, which is not quite true. A wall of that height is only necessary to prevent falling off a balcony to a level 1 story or more below. Because this boundary separates a terrace which is at level from the roof of the adjoining property, which is also walkable, there is no hazard, there is no falling hazard. Therefore, there is no need for an 1100mm wall at all. It could simply be stepped over, and that means that there are other solutions which could be found here. ideally a reversion back to the solution that the previous officer required through the determination he made previously. In conclusion then, we consider planning permission for this proposal should be refused for the same reasons as the previous application was considered unacceptable prior to its amendment. We would welcome a solution that retains a decent setback from the property boundary and enables the existing planter to be retained to prevent harmful overlooking, albeit perhaps with refurbishment, but without any unnecessary intervention to the party wall.
Your time is up, Mr. Leggett. So thank you very much. I think we've heard your points well. Thank you. Now it's Mr. Hussein's turn. When you're ready.
Hello. I'm the resident in 16. I'm not going to rebut the points that were made. It takes too long. I think the report is comprehensive. We spent a lot of time...
Sorry, do you mind taking your mask off, please, because I can't hear you very clearly.
Sorry, a lot of time and money was spent doing it. The report's comprehensive, it's crystal clear. Unfortunately, you can't see from that picture that I'm, unlike nearly anyone else in Hillgate Village, I'm totally enclosed by brick wall. The key thing I'm going to reiterate here, in fact, the single most important point is that my neighbour, who I've spoken to at the beginning of this process and throughout the process, has two problems. One is privacy, which I totally understand. He's more sensitive than me, but I understand that. And the second one is the maintenance of his herb garden and sophisticated irrigation system. And I have repeatedly said to him, I am happy to integrate the planter and any ideas into my design. And they've been summarily rejected. Okay, so I have been reasonable throughout this. In a sense, all we're talking about, I've reduced the length of the wall, all we're talking about is a brick wall of the right height on our shared party wall. It is as simple as that.
All right, thank you very much. Well within your time. Colleagues, do we have questions to either Mr. Hussein or Mr. Leggett? None so far. I think
Chairman,
you'll both appreciate that we can't get into sort of private law disputes between neighbours over party walls and things like that. I would just ask, with that point that I've just made in mind, why, Mr. Hussein, you want to replace the planter, just out of interest?
I think for two reasons. One is that what you can't see on this picture is the gap between, on the other side, permission was granted for a appropriate building regulations wall. So I've got a brick wall where that diagonal is. I'm facing a brick wall. And my neighbour at the beginning of this scheme said that he has two concerns. Privacy, because that wall, when the plants were not as high, was much lower, and he could see my dogs. So I said the solution to this is to totally enclose me in brick. And then the only issue is whether the height of the wall meets building regulations. So the solution here is I am trying to help him with privacy, and I'm trying to enclose myself in brick so that I have some design consistency, which is not the case at the moment, because we've got three different walls there at the moment, our shared wall, his wall, my wall. I'm replacing the wall that is grey with glass, so it is design consistent in London brick, so it's going to look the same. I'm enclosing myself, and I'm trying to respect his privacy. The issue of height is only driven from building regulations. I am indifferent. I'm indifferent to how high it is. And moreover, I've offered consistently, if he wants to maintain the rosemary, I'm more than happy to design a feature to hold the rosemary, not in a metal structure that leaks, by the way, onto the party wall. I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to pay for it. I have been trying for a year and a half to get him to say what design he would like. I'm not against any change to my design which allows him to keep the herb garden on his side of the party wall, the shared party wall. So I have bent over backwards to try to be reasonable, and it's cost me quite a lot of time, so I'm still not in.
Thank you. So again, conscious of not wanting to get into planning private law disputes, you're saying that you would accommodate your neighbours' concerns by incorporating a rosemary or herb bed in the top of the bit of wall that would replace the planter?
It is in the materials you find. Instead of going, without getting terribly detailed here, I have offered, and it's in the plans, to have a single brick wall along the party wall, and then have an integrated design to hold his rosemary bush on his side of the party wall. It's been summarily rejected, which is why now what we have as a proposal is a double-width brick wall, essentially on my right-hand side, which, by the way, matches exactly the brick wall on my left-hand side, so I'm totally enclosed. It's been rejected. I'm happy to build a brick structure that allows him having privacy and the herb garden. I have no problem with his herb garden and his irrigation system. But you can't have plants on a rusting metal structure of the wrong height. It doesn't offer him privacy.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to inquire of officers if there are no further questions for any of the parties. If you can just draw our attention to where these plans are that show the proposed planter in the wall. Do we know about that?
No, Chairman. The application before you is purely for a brick wall.
Right,
I mean,
sorry.
there have been discussions prior to this application which have included planters and so forth. I think a number of potential solutions have been discussed, but the planning application before you is purely to add a brick wall. And in that image there, you can see the wall in section and in elevation. So there's no planter included with this application.
Right.
Planning permission is required because of the structure of the brick wall. That amounts to development requiring planning permission.
So when Mr. Hussain said you can see it in the plans, he meant other plans that are not
other plans. I mean, I think this is a situation where clearly planning permission is required for the wall, but the solution may not lie in the planning system. The solution may lie in the party wall system.
Yeah, well, that's what I was about to mention next. Seems that we are just looking at this in planning terms and trying not to consider party wall issues and private law issues between neighbours. So we just have to say, is it acceptable in planning terms? Colleagues, any questions to Mr. Taylor? Councillor Evans.
Is there any way we can nail down Mr. Hussain's proposals to keep the planters and the irrigation system and grant him the brick wall?
I'll let Mr. Taylor answer that, but I think not.
No, I mean, through you, Chairman, I'm afraid not. I mean, planning permission is required for the wall. Whatever irrigation or other planters might be placed there in the future, that's for them to discuss. I mean, there's nothing before the planning authority that includes a planter. So this application is purely for a brick wall. If this was granted and the party wall discussions led in a different direction, then they might have to come back with another application. But that's really for the two parties to discuss.
So they can do an agreement between them?
Well, one would hope that the parties would reach an agreement.
Have a drink.
That they could agree on something different to the planning application, and that then they might have to return with another planning application. But that's up to them.
Right.
The only thing before the planning authority in this application is a wall of 1,100 mil in height. A brick wall.
But I'm right, aren't I, Mr. Taylor, that we can note in the minutes Mr. Hussain's confirmation and offer that there is a willingness to incorporate a planter in the proposed wall?
Certainly, Chairman, that could be noted in the minutes, yeah.
Yeah.
Chairman, could I ask Mr. Taylor, at Planning Committee, Mr. Taylor, we are asked to look at a structure, and if that structure was permanently built, in the future, looking back in 50 years' time, regardless of who lives here, is that structure acceptable in architectural terms to that building? And that's the judgment, I think, could you confirm that's the judgment we have to make this evening? And then just adding on the tail of that, if somebody wants to put some plant pots on top of a wall, that's a temporary thing, and it doesn't need planning permission and doesn't need to come to us. All we're asked to do is look at the permanent wall, and I believe this wall is 1.1 metres high or 1.2, which is required by the building regulations on the side of a raised terrace. So in a sense, we're halfway there, because we have to sort of approve this kind of wall if, in our judgment, it fits the building as a permanent feature in the future. But what people want to put on the wall is up to them.
Yes, I mean, I think there are three parts to that, really. I mean, the first one is that obviously you have to consider that a wall is a suitable thing to have in this area, and that the predominant building material clearly is brick in that vicinity. And the wall would presumably be there for some considerable time. In terms of pots and things on walls, I mean, freestanding pots don't require planning permission, so that they could put whatever they wanted to on top of the wall that was, you know, freestanding pots, and planning permission is not required for that. In terms of building regulations, I mean, because no one can fall off this roof onto the neighbour's roof, I mean, strictly there probably isn't a building regulations requirement to have a wall running along the boundary. I mean, the building regs requirement would be to have a wall to stop you falling off the roof down into the lower yard. But obviously it just makes sense to have a wall to the same height, which obviously then coincides with the railing that does run along the outer boundary. I think that covers all the 3 points.
Yes, that is helpful. Thank you very much. So, colleagues, any further points that any of you want to make, or points you want to discuss amongst us? Otherwise, we can move to a vote. Well, I've, as you heard, suggested that Mr. Sain's willingness to incorporate a planter is minuted. No doubt he's a man of his word, and that might go some way to assuaging the concerns of the client, Mr. Leggett, but who knows, that's not really a matter for us. I think we've done the best we can on that front. So the recommendation is that the committee grants planning permission with the conditions listed in section 10 of this report, and I will start with Councillor Dent-Code.
Hoping peace will break out, Chair. Grant.
Councillor Spalding.
Yes, also grant, Chairman.
Councillor Evans.
Grant, Chair.
Councillor Woodger.
In favour, Chair.
And I'm also in favour. So permission is granted on that basis. Thank you very much. And then we move to Erdley Crescent, and Councillor Spalding is recusing himself from this application. Have I got the order right? Yes.
Thank you very much, Chairman. The application site is the property at number 5, outlined there with the yellow circle on the screen. It's currently 3 stories plus a basement level. The application relates to flat 1, which is on the uppermost floor in the building. You'll note from this aerial photograph that the building is unusual in the terrace, in that it doesn't have a mansard story, with the prevailing character being of mansard roofs with front dormers, and also, as this photo shows from the opposite side of the terrace, looking at the rear dormers feature within the mansards within the majority of the terrace. This next slide just gives you some street level views of the application site, so the top one looking directly onto the property and looking north along the crescent in the bottom image. Planning permission is sought for the construction of a mansard roof extension to number 5, with 3 dormer windows to the front elevation and 2 to the rear. So there's the existing front and rear elevations on the screen now, and then as proposed with the front elevation on the left-hand side, and the rear on the right-hand side. The mansard would be clad in natural slate tiles with timber sliding sashes. In section there, with the existing and proposed both on screen, just to show the traditional profile proposed, with the overall height of the mansard sitting below that of the parapet and the chimney stacks. And my last slide shows you the existing and proposed floor plans, with the proposed floor plan on the far right-hand side there, included to show you that there are 2 roof lights also proposed, which will be located on the flat roof section of the mansard. And that concludes the presentation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Harrell. So we do have a registered objector, Mrs. Gadomska, and you have 3 minutes when you're ready, please.
Good evening, everyone. I'm objecting to this application for the following reasons. I have made an extensive search on your website of all the planning application for Eardley Crescent. In every case where an extra floor has been built, the whole structure of the house has been taken into account when the building was undergoing conversion into flats. There needs to be consideration to the disruption this work would cause to the lives of the occupants of flats 2, 3, and 4. I see from the planning application that the owners of flat 1 are Nevern Place Rentals Development Limited. They have never contacted me, or the owner tenant of flat 2 or tenant flat 4. If permission is granted, I request that a condition is added that all staircases are internal within the current flat 1 and that no communal space is used. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Gadomska. That's very helpful. And colleagues, questions for Mrs. Gadomska? Councillor Denkode.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand. We haven't had many drawings. I'm trying to understand the layout of your flat and what else is happening in that building. I wonder if you can explain. You said that, for example, some of the issues that you brought up are management issues, more than planning issues. But can you explain your very specific concern about how this will affect you?
What they're going to use the communal space on the floor 1 for the flat on the floor 2. It means the access they're trying to succeed is the one on floor 1. And they should use their own floor. The flat 1 should use their own floor, not the communal space. They should build the spiral case or internal, inside, yes, inside the flat. But now they're taking the our stairs, the communal stairs.
Okay, so they basically they would have 2 units that they just walk between?
They just taking the staircases.
That's quite strange.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll ask about the planning issues on that in a minute. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question, which clarified one of the points I was going to ask. Thank you very much, Mrs. Gadomska. That's a very helpful explanation. You'll appreciate that
we are considering only planning issues this evening, and some of the points that you've raised are, again, rather like the previous application, more sort of private law type issues between freeholders and leaseholders and different leaseholders in the building, and to do with communal space. So we're somewhat restricted in what we can do, but I think probably I speak for us all in saying we sympathise with your concerns. On that note, let's move on and ask Katie Hull any questions we may have about this. Councillor Code.
Yes, I'm aware that there are quite a few very imperfect homes like this, particularly down Kensington High Street on the south side, where there are flats on 2 floors and they have the kitchen or 2 or 3 floors, they have the kitchen halfway up. And it's very, I mean, in planning terms, is that actually a flat? Is that one unit? If it's actually in 2 parts, aren't there any planning policies against that kind of development where you're using communal stairs, and it seems to be downgrading of a home rather than improvement?
I think it might be helpful if I just clarify it. Unfortunately, I'm afraid the existing plans aren't included in your pack, so I apologise. That would have helped explain it. But there is the existing plan, second floor plan on the screen on the left-hand side. If you see the area that I've circled there, this is the communal staircase that we're referring to. So this is the current second floor level. This communal staircase provides access to the roof. So it's not a staircase to access 2 different floors within one flat. It is just access to the roof level. So what the proposals would do is internalise that communal staircase, essentially cutting it off and making it all part of flat 1, which would then be at 3rd floor and the mansard floor level. I hope I've made that clear. So it's not that it would reduce access to another part of the flat, it would just reduce access for the objector and the other residents within the building to the roof.
Councillor Evans.
So, in terms of fire escape, is there an escape route available for each and every flat? And if so, where is that?
I'm afraid I don't know what the fire route would be. I understand that the communal staircase is for access to the roof for maintenance purposes. It's not a fire escape, but I wouldn't want to specify or confirm what each individual fire escape would be for the flat.
If I understand you, though, you say that a stairwell that was communal before is now going to be internalized by one flat.
That's
or
correct.
2 flats.
That's correct. So a communal staircase at the moment would become internalised and would become part of flat 1.
Well, is the present communal staircase a fire escape?
I'm not sure what the fire escape route is within the property.
Okay.
I would find it odd if the fire escape was up onto the current roof access, but I wouldn't want to comment. I don't know what the arrangement would be. Certainly, it is currently accessible to all the residents within that property to get up onto the roof, and that would no longer be possible through this proposal. But of course, there might be other rights, civil rights, that do still allow access onto the roof that would be covered by the leasehold within the building.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions for Katie Harrell? No? Okay. Well, in which case I suggest we move to a vote. As we discussed, there are limited powers available to us to deal with private law issues and leaseholder, freeholder type issues, and we're simply looking at this in planning terms and whether effectively a mansard infill further floor in the street is acceptable. So, colleagues, the recommendation is that the committee grants planning permission with the conditions listed in section 9 of this report. Councillor Evans.
I have to abstain on this.
Right. Councillor Woodger.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Dentcade.
Against.
And I am in favour. So planning permission is granted on that basis. Thank you very much. And we move to Brompton Road.
Thank you. The application is at number 272 to 278 Brompton Road. You'll have seen from the officer's report in the recent planning history that back in November a certificate of lawfulness was granted to confirm that the premises could be used as a restaurant under the new Class C in the permitted development rights. The application before you this evening is for the replacement plant to service this restaurant. I'll just briefly talk you through the proposals. It's proposed to make use of an existing plant enclosure located on the main roof of the building. So the enclosure is there in the left-hand image on the screen, and on the right-hand side, I'm afraid it's not the clearest of images, but you can hopefully see where I've circled. There's this existing roof here. This is where the enclosure is located. This is the existing roof plan with that enclosure I just showed you where my cursor is now. And note that there's an existing duct on the side of the roof there. Under the proposals, there'd be a new extract fan and duct located here. And then all the other plant would be located within that existing enclosure. So there's 3 new catering condensers, 4 new air conditioning condensers, and they're all located within that existing structure. You'll have noted in the objections sent in that the plans were perhaps a bit misleading. There was an error in the original plans submitted, and it showed that the height of that enclosure was to be increased. We did receive amended plans clarifying that the plant enclosure would not change in either size or height, and we reconsulted on those plans to ensure that residents were aware of that. So this is the existing elevational set of drawings, and then the proposed. So hopefully you can see the coloured bits and pieces of plant on the proposed elevational and sectional drawings there, just showing you that they would all be below the height of that existing plant enclosure. And that's the presentation, just to say that as with all plant and extract applications, our environmental health officers have considered the submission, including all the supporting information, and are satisfied there would be no disturbance to local residents when the plant is operating.
Thank you very much. No speakers are registered, so we move to questions to officers. Are there any? No. So let's move to a vote. The recommendation is that the committee grants planning permission with the conditions listed in section 9 of this report. No, I beg your pardon, I was looking at the wrong one. It's an identical recommendation, luckily. So I will start with Councillor Spalding.
Grant, Chairman.
Councillor Dentcade.
Grant.
Councillor Evans.
Grant, Chair.
Councillor Woodger.
In favour, Chair.
And I'm also in favour. So planning permission is granted on that basis. Thank you very much. And we move to Cotswold Gardens.
Thank you very much. This application relates to the rear garden of the property. The photograph on the screen shows you this garden, and there are an existing 2 outbuildings at the rear boundary of the site. Again, this photograph just shows you the garden. It's a longer view from the property itself. And then in plan, just to show you the existing buildings, 1 on each side, with open space in between. Under the proposals, these would be demolished and rebuilt with a new link between the 2 structures. I hope you can see on screen the dotted red line, which shows you the existing footprint of the buildings. You'll see they are slightly deeper. They are also slightly taller. Again, there's a dotted red line on this plan showing you the original height and then the new proposed structures. You can see there in the black line in terms of the context, the photo on the left-hand side shows you there is another garden room at neighbouring property at number 10. And the aerial image on the right-hand side shows you the boundary at the rear of the garden with the Eldon Road properties. I raise this as you'll have seen one of the objections is from the occupier of number 19 Eldon Road, who, hopefully you can see my cursor, lives in the building there that I'm just highlighting. The next slide probably illustrates this better. You can see here the glazed roof to that property behind this right-hand outbuilding. And then this photograph within the pack shows you the view from that property looking out in that glazed structure to the rear garden. The blue solid area here is the existing outbuilding view. Again, it's very faint, but there's a green line here which shows you the difference if we were to permit the greater height in the new proposed outbuilding. The objectors helpfully included some more photographs which are within your pack which illustrate that as well. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No registered speakers on this either. Colleagues, do you have questions for Ms. Hull? Councillor Spaulding.
Clearly, as you've noted in your report, there will be some slight harm to the light amenity of the conservatory of number 19 Eldon Road, which this is the view of. I mean, the trellis is there and that could grow up with plants anyway. But what I can't quite reconcile is when we look at the plan at the beginning of the report, number 19 Eldon Road, I know that's not the property is the applicant, but it's the one that's most affected, or possibly number 21 is actually, but 19 have put in this objection. They've supplied a plan at the end of Dr. Aaron's letter when he refers to all the photographs, A through to I. That I can't reconcile that plan with the apparent structure plan of number 19 on the map. Because it seems the conservatory is an L shape on the map, but it's fully built across in the plan that's been supplied to us. And so when we go back to the picture showing the amount of light that's been cut off, according to the structure in the actual plan that's been supplied, the conservatory doesn't go across the whole back of the garden anyway. Is that correct? The conservatory there is just half the garden, but in the plan that the objector has supplied, the conservatory goes across the whole of the back of the garden.
I believe the plan in the objector's submission is correct, and that our site plan in the beginning of the pack is incorrect. My understanding is that the conservatory runs along the full width of the rear boundary.
So presumably there's some planning history of where the conservatory was extended right across the back of the property of number 19 Eldon Road. But I think the harm is minimal because the conservatory has a complete glazed roof anyway.
As I say, I think the images that the objector has provided actually really help with this assessment, because yes, you're absolutely right that the conservatory roof is quite extensive, and so a lot of light is able to get in through the roof, and you're absolutely right, the existing trellis limits both the outlook and the light that comes in from the rear elevation of the conservatory structure.
And that minimal harm, I think these buildings are rather beautiful, these pavilions in the back of this garden, rather enhance Cottesmore Gardens, number 8, the rear garden. I think they're rather beautiful, and I think the benefit of seeing that from the rest of the houses outweighs the bit of light at the back of it with the neighbour beyond.
Yep, certainly officers' view is that the replacements are more aesthetically pleasing than the existing sort of timber ad hoc structures. So yes, I think officers would agree with that statement.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? For what it's worth, I think I share Councillor Spalding's view that this looks as though it's an improvement. But each to their own. So the recommendation is that the committee grants planning permission with conditions listed in section 9 of this report. Councillor Spalding.
In favour to grant, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Denkade.
Grant.
Councillor Evans.
Grant, Chair.
Councillor Woodger.
In favour, Chair.
And I'm also in favour. Thank you very much. We move to Peter Jones. Please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of images for you. You're very familiar with the Peter Jones building. Here it is. There are some repair and maintenance works proposed that were granted approval and listed building consent last year. Whilst these works are ongoing, it's proposed to cover the building with a shroud. We've heard a bit about it already this evening. Here's an image for you on the screen of what it would look like. So largely plain with a bit of branding, and largely the purpose is to show that it is still open for customers to go and do their shopping. And there's the presentation for you. It is a temporary permission, of course. You'll see that the condition recommended restricts the length of time that the shroud would be able to be in place.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, any questions? No. I'm exposing my age. I remember the last time Peter Jones did major works. Seems only yesterday, but I fear it was probably about 15 years ago. Anyway, so the recommendation is to grant advertisement consent with the conditions listed in section 9 of this report. Councillor Evans.
Grant, please.
Councillor Woodger.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Spalding.
Grant, Chairman.
Councillor Denkade.
Grant.
And I'm also in favour. So advertisement consent is granted on that basis. Thank you. And it's now Calcutta Street.
Thank you, Chairman. So this application is for rear extensions and alterations to number 13 Calcutta Street. That's just a photograph of the front of the property, just to give you the flavour, typical Hillgate Village house. At the rear, maybe not so typical. The existing rear extension has sort of quite a large upper part to the extension that's probably not typical of the area. But that's not actually part of the proposal. The proposal is to extend to the left of that within the light well that you see there at the left side of the photograph. Taken from the sun and daylight study, that's the model showing the form of the existing property at the rear. So you can see there the pitched roof in green that you saw in the last photograph. And that's the proposal. So if I flick backwards, that's the existing. If you look to the left at number 12, you'll see number 12 already has an extension at the rear with a narrow balcony and a spiral leading down to the yard. And that's now what's proposed at number 13. There's also a roof terrace that you see there at the second floor level, adjacent to, slightly below, the one at number 12. So effectively, they're not mirroring, but they're reflecting the existing elevation to number 12, adjacent to it. That's the last slide, Chairman.
Thank you very much. No registered speakers. Colleagues, any questions for Mr. Taylor? No. Well, in which case, just wondering whether I had a question. No, I think not, actually. Been covered. So the recommendation is that the committee grants planning permission with the conditions listed in section 9 of this report. Councillor Dencode.
Grant.
Thank you. Councillor Spalding.
Grant.
Councillor Woodger.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Evans.
Grant, please.
And I'm also in favour. Thank you very much. Planning permission is granted on that basis.
Okay, thank you. And then turning to the next two applications in the North Pack, planning permission and listed building consent applications for number 21 Stafford Terrace. There are two elements to the proposal. Basically, one is the fitting of internal air conditioning grilles, and the second is the positioning of the external plant in the rear garden to run the air conditioning. So the front elevation there, again, just to give you the flavour, sort of typical listed building elevation for Stafford Terrace. That image, if you look closely, I appreciate it's difficult at this scale, but if you look closely, you can see where internal grilles are positioned within the wall, and then running along beneath the first floor, you can see where the air conditioning duct is basically run immediately beneath the floor, which is about the only acceptable place for it to go, I think, in listed building terms. That's the rear garden. Clearly, the rear garden's been sort of landscaped a bit already. Over at the right-hand side, you can see that there's a shed, a white-painted shed. That's basically for the external air conditioning unit that would go in that position. And that's an acoustic enclosure for the air conditioning unit. So the shed would be removed, the air conditioning unit would be replaced in this acoustic enclosure within the rear garden in the same position. And that's the last slide, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, any questions for Mr. Taylor? Can you just flip back to the previous slide, please?
So that slide shows the position of the acoustic enclosure.
Yeah, that's the one. I just wanted to check that the air conditioning unit was not causing more disturbance to a neighbour than it was to the house that it was cooling, but it doesn't appear that that's the case.
The unit itself, you can see there by the blue dotted line, so that the unit itself isn't immediately adjacent to the boundary wall.
No.
There's quite a big separation, actually, between between the unit and the acoustic enclosure.
Yeah, if that's drawn correctly. Nothing from colleagues, so we will move to vote on both the planning permission and the listed building consent. And the recommendation is that the committee grants planning permission and listed building consent with the conditions listed in section 9 of this report. We can take them both together, can't we, Mr. Taylor? Mr. Taylor? Sorry, we can take both the planning permission and the listed building.
You should take them one after the other.
Oh, right. I just noted that the recommendation deals with both, but happy to split them. So let's split the recommendation slightly. It's recommended the committee grants planning permission with the conditions listed in section 9 of this report. Councillor Dencode.
Grant.
Councillor Spalding. Councillor Evans, beg your pardon.
Grant.
And Councillor Woodger.
In favour, Chair.
And I'm in favour. And then
Grant.
Thank you. And then listed building consent, Councillor Dencode.
Grant. Can we ban plastic grass, please? And listed buildings. It's an aberration. Thank you.
I must admit I agree with you, but it's not part of this decision. Councillor Spalding. Councillor Evans.
Grant.
Councillor Woodger.
In favour, Chair.
And I'm also in favour. So listed building consent is granted as well. Thank you very much. And the final case, I think, is Notting Hill Gate. Mr. Taylor. Thank you.
Yes, that's right, Chairman. I'd love a planning policy to resist plastic grass. We'll see what we can do. So the last application for you this evening is another wood-burning stove flue, this time for a pizza oven. You can see the application property identified there by the star at the end of its terrace, and I think these two images really say everything we need to about it. I mean, the left-hand image there is a photograph of the existing building. So you can see that there's a kitchen extract as existing that runs right up the rear elevation to expel at rooftop level. And then the right-hand image, that's the proposal, which includes a new flue. This is the pizza oven flue, positioned beside the old flue. So the old flue is still operative. That's the main kitchen extract. And then the pizza oven would have its own dedicated extract. So one flue would become two flues. And then in drawing terms, that shows the proposed flue positioned beside the existing flue. That's the last slide, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And colleagues, questions for Mr. Taylor?
Chairman, could I ask, wood-burning stoves, you've got condition 6 on odours. When we had one earlier this evening, this is going back to Portobello Road, which is in the same pack, but about next but one, going backwards. We had quite a lengthy informative, paragraph 4 of the informatives about smoke control areas, smoke control orders, Clean Air Act, right down to the Clean Air Act 1993 and the make of the oven and so on. But I don't see that informative in this list of informatives. Would it be useful to have it in there?
Certainly. I mean, the Environmental Health Officer recommended it in the case of Portobello, but I think it completely applies to this application as well. Why not add it to this one? Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, can you refer me to the informative you're talking about? I haven't been able to find it. Probably being rather
It's
slow.
the informative number 4 on the Portobello Road application. So it commences with the sentence, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea is a smoke control area. The smoke control order was made in 2004.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Okay. Be happy to incorporate that in this one. Seems to be general assent. All right. Well, if there are no further questions or comments, but it does strike me as though it's potentially harmful to have another flue there, but probably broadly on balance acceptable.
We need a policy to deal with this somehow. If it's environmental policy, that's something, but we need, yeah, put it in your file.
Yeah. All right. Well, the recommendation is that the committee grants planning permission with the conditions listed in section 9 of this report, and we're going to include Councillor Spalding's helpful additional informative. And could I hear, please, from Councillor Evans?
In favour.
Thank you. Councillor Woodrow?
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Denkhead?
In favour.
Councillor Spalding?
In favour, grant, Chairman.
And I'm also in favour. So thank you very much, and planning permission is granted on that basis, and that concludes this evening's proceedings. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
How are we going to deal with filthy air when everyone's doing pizza ovens? I'm going to keep this back. How can we clean up our air? Supposedly making us